My grandmother forces all her house guests to follow a strange set of rules. My grandmother is superstitious. It was only when living with her for the summer that I realized how bad it had gotten. She had this huge frickin' list taped to the fridge with 10 different rules she had everybody abide by. And she was making me follow them too. When I opened my umbrella inside, she grabbed my arm and yanked me back. "Don't open the umbrella inside. Didn't you see the rules?" Sorry, I thought the rules were, just suggestions." "No. Everyone who lives here must obey the rules," she said in a raspy whisper. It made me really sad. Once Grandma Jan was sharp as a needle, a grounded, logical person who occasionally bought into superstitions and the paranormal. A rabbit's foot here, a penny there. Now it seemed in her late 80s, that part of her had grown and grown until it subsumed everything else. With a heavy heart, I walked over to the fridge and read the rest of the rules. Do not spill salt. Do not open umbrellas inside. Do not put on clothes inside out. Do not clip fingernails after dark. Do not break any mirrors. Mostly common superstitions, though the fingernail one was a little weird. But I continued reading. With difficulty, her handwriting grew messier and more frenzied. Rule number 6. Do not look in the mirror while wearing black. Do not whistle inside the house. If you wake up to see your bedroom door open, do not close it. Likewise, if you see the attic stairs pulled down, do not push them back up. Number 9. Never let the refrigerator go empty. Always have enough to make an offering. And the very last rule. Keep the curtains closed after 10 p.m. Do not open them again until 6 a.m. I wanted to tell her it was a whole lot of hogwash, but I realized then that it was probably a bad idea to upset her at such an old age. No problem, Grandma. I'll follow the rules. Yeah, right. She put me in the spare bedroom, down the hall from her. It was a small thing, furnished with only a twin bed and a tiny desk, but I couldn't complain. It was either this for free, or an apartment for $1,000 a month. But of course, the money wasn't the main reason that I was here. My grandma probably wouldn't be around much longer. According to my mom, she kept getting these random bruises. The doctors were worried that she may have a blood disorder, and some other stuff I couldn't pronounce. I wanted to spend all the time I could with her. She was still my grandma. Still the one who comforted me when my first cat died. Still the one who taught me how to bake the most amazing snickerdoodles. I loved her even if I had to put up with some weird-ass rules. "I'm going to bed," she said as she passed by my room that night. "Sleep well, Chrissy. I love you." Good night, Grandma. I love you too. I spent an hour on the internet, and then put my computer away and fell asleep. I woke up a few hours later, groaning in the darkness. I rolled over to see my bedroom door open. I didn't leave that open. I stared at it half asleep, too tired to get up and close it. Oh well. According to the rules, I can't close it anyway. I snuggled up in my pillow and closed my eyes. And that's when I heard the whistling. A soft, melancholy tune coming from downstairs. Every muscle in my body froze. That was one of the rules, wasn't it? No whistling inside. So why would Grandma be whistling downstairs? I glanced at the clock. Freaking 2 a.m. I pulled myself out of bed and walked into the hallway. The attic stairs had been pulled down. The darkness from the attic bled down into the hallway, along with the faint smell of rust and rotten food. Behind it, Grandma's door hung open. I slowly descended the stairs. "Grandma?" The whistling stopped. When I entered the kitchen, it was empty. "Grandma, where are you?" "Over here." I looked up to see Grandma appear from the dark family room, wearing her floral nightdress. "Did I wake you, honey? I'm so sorry. I wanted to get some milk for my heartburn." No, it's fine. I just thought that, you weren't supposed to whistle," I said with a chuckle. According to the rules." "You heard the whistling?" she asked, her eyes wide. And I nodded. She grabbed my arm in a vice grip and led me back up the stairs. "Go back to sleep," she commanded. Before I could reply, she disappeared back down the hallway, leaving my door open. "I think Grandma's going crazy."
"Oh, are you talking about her rules?"
Mom said on the other end.
"I know they're eccentric, but she gets really upset if you break them. And the doctor, he doesn't want us to upset her, you know?"
I sighed. "Isn't that bad for her mental health?"
"We all go a little bit crazy near the end. Uncle Finley thought that the government was tapping all of his phones in the 90s. Great-Grandma Beasley always talked about the same bat following her around. Just best to let sleeping dogs lie at this point, you know?"
"But the rules are so weird, Mom. Like, really freaking weird. And I woke up late last night at like 2 a.m. to find the attic stairs pulled down. I mean, what was she doing?"
"You know what?"
Mom said, a bit angrier tinged in her voice.
"She lives all by herself in that secluded little house 365 days a year. The only socialization that she gets is her weekly trip to the grocery store and monthly visits from your dad and me. Anyone would go a little nuts under those circumstances, even you. Lay off her, okay?"
Fine. So I followed all the rules. I was a good girl and didn't open any umbrellas indoors, do any whistling, or break any mirrors. Sometimes I'd wake up to see my door open in the middle of the night, but I just ignored it and left it open. A few times when I made my way to the bathroom, I whacked my head on the attic stairs that were pulled down. Once or twice I heard the whistling again, but ignored that too. Mom was right. So Grandma was a little bit crazy. We're all a little bit crazy, aren't we? Maybe time just scratches away all the normalcy that we hide under, and we're all just batshit insane in the end. Things were good as I accepted that reality. Then Sunday happened. I was watching Netflix when I heard a clink, and then a shout. I threw my laptop on the bed and ran down the stairs. "Grandma!" I yelled, fearing the worst. "Grandma, are you okay?" I found her standing over the kitchen table, sobbing her eyes out. And on the table was a salt shaker tipped over. Next to it, a pile of spilled salt. "I didn't mean... I was just cleaning up the plates and I... She could barely make any cohesive sentences through the sobs. "Shh, Grandma, it's okay. I'll clean it up, you know?" I felt awful seeing Grandma like that. She was outright sobbing, her entire body shaking as if she feared for her life, and over spilled salt. I brought my palm up to the table's edge and brushed the salt onto my other hand. I was so sad for Grandma, but I was also incredibly unnerved. Seeing someone you love get so upset over something so trivial, it was disturbing. "It's all clean, see?" I said, brushing off my hands. The salt rained down into the trash. "Nothing to worry about, Grandma." Her sobs quieted, and then she looked at me with red eyes. "But he'll know," she said. "What?" "Even though you cleaned it up, he still know." "Who?" She looked at me. "The spirit of the house." "The spirit of the house." Despite how skeptical I was of ghosts, spirits, and everything paranormal, I felt a little shiver go down my spine. Wasn't it legend that ghosts and spirits didn't like salt? that if you surrounded yourself with salt, you'd be protected from them. Propagating a superstition about spilling salt could be a ghost defense mechanism. If ghosts exist, which they absolutely positively did not. That night I barely slept a wink. I stared at my ceiling as the minutes ticked by. 2 a.m., 3 a.m., and 4 a.m. It was around 4:15 that I heard something stir. Soft footsteps from overhead, from the attic. Every muscle in my body froze as I listened to the steps migrate towards Grandma's end of the house. And then, a creak. The metallic whine of the attic stairs being pulled down, followed by footsteps. I forced myself out of bed. I took a huge, heaping serving of courage to do so, but I did. And when I finally got to the door and pulled it open, the hallway was empty. Maybe the ghost is here, right now, staring at me, and I just don't know it. No, shut up. Ghosts don't exist, you idiot. The back of my neck prickled with the distinct, awful feeling of being watched. But rather than hum back into my own room, believe me, I really wanted to. I ran over to check on Grandma. Her door hung open as usual. Grandma, are you okay? Her bed was empty. Grandma, where are you? And that's when I heard the soft sounds of sobbing below. I ran down the stairs, nearly slipping and busting into the kitchen. And Grandma stood in the kitchen. In front of her stood the spirit of the house. Not some dark, ethereal specter, not some white, translucent ghost. A man of flesh and blood. His brown beard was unkempt and messy, his blue eyes wild. He wore tattered clothes and black boots, and had a yellow-toothed grin. "You've broken the rules of the house," he whispered, stepping towards her, and she flinched and took a step back. "Please don't hurt me," she sobbed. "I'm the man of the house. I make the rules." Grin growing wider, he raised his hand to smack her across the shoulder. "No!" I shouted as I charged at him. We collided and fell to the ground. Terror and relief washed over my grandma's face. "Call the police!" I shouted. "Now!" He tried to wiggle underneath me, and I grabbed the nearest thing, a chair from the kitchen table, and smacked him as hard as I could over the head. The man turned out to be a drifter by the name of Harold McCain. According to the police, he snuck into my poor grandma's house over a year ago. They found his living space in the attic, complete with a makeshift bed over the rafters, books and dishes that he held my grandmother's leftover food, the offerings. He slowly had taken advantage of my grandmother, persuading her over the months to follow his rules. He told her that he was angry and was the spirit of the house, and in her sensitive, mentally fragile state, she believed him. He made her swear to tell nobody of his existence, and whenever she broke the rules, he hit her, hence the bruises. My poor grandma. For the time being, she's moved in with me. We have a tiny little apartment near my college, and I've been helping her recover. She's doing well. She freaked out a little bit over a dropped cosmetic mirror the other day, but overall, she's getting much better. She even whistles inside the apartment now, and it's the sweetest sound I've ever heard. I went to a speed dating event. There's something seriously wrong with one of the guys here. I attended a speed dating event with my best friend Mindy. "I think I found someone," she gushed to me during one of her breaks. "Oh yeah?" I felt a twinge of jealousy. So far, the best contender that I'd found was a neckbeard who smelled strongly of pickles, who was also a liar. "What about you?" Some dumb guy who claims that he makes 6 figures as a life coach, I said. I can't stand liars. But anyway, which one is yours? She lifted a red lacquered nail and pointed. A lanky man leaning against the bar. Long, dark hair slicked back. Black button up top. A garnished metal ring on his middle finger. Him? I asked. She nodded enthusiastically. He did not look like Mindy's usual type. She was the kind of woman who went for the safe bets. The office nerds who calls their mom every day. The grad student who works on boring papers like an analysis of courtship in the 19th century literature. Not some half-goth, half-motorcycle rider. His name's Micah, and he's incredible. Do you know what he told me? She lowered her voice. He said, I'm the prettiest girl here. I frowned. Another liar. And he works at Goldman Sachs. That guy works at Goldman Sachs? Definitely a liar. She nodded, and I scoffed. I didn't know that they hired goths. What? He's not a goth. He totally is. The ring, the long hair, the black shirt. What? His hair is short, she said. I don't understand. Before I could reply, the event coordinator rang the bell, signaling that the second half was about to begin. I made my way back down to my little table, and on the other side of the room from Mindy, which I was now thankful for, and took a sloppy gulp of wine. Hello. I looked up, and across from me sat Micah. He was even more weirdly dressed up close. The first button of his shirt was undone, showing a gratuitous tuft of chest hair. His hands shone in the lights, as if mildly greasy. Somehow, though, he was still kind of attractive. Like those fries that have been sitting in your fridge for a week, and even though they're all soggy and gross, all you want to do is eat them as fast as you can. I'm Amanda, I said. Micah. So, Micah, what do you do? What don't I do? He said under his breath with a condescending laugh. Sorry? Nothing. I'm an artist. He's lying to her. I knew it. An awkward silence fell between us, and finally I started. So, Micah, what do you like to do for fun? He grinned, wider than I'd seen a grin all night. Then he leaned in close, lowered his voice to a whisper, and said, I'll tell you exactly what I do for fun. Okay. I like to go riding at night, under the light of the moon, with just the wind on my back and the stars above me. On a motorcycle? You could say that, yeah. Weird reply, but okay. I ride into town, see if there's any fun to be had. He made eye contact with me. See if there are any speed dating events, for example. So you do this often? I said, not sure exactly where he was going. Have you ever met anyone that you liked? Of course. Lots of beautiful girls at these events. Then why are you still looking? He smiled again, leaned in even closer, until I could smell the musty, greasy smell on his hair. Because I've killed all of them. My heart stopped. Excuse me? You know, you're the first woman I've ever met who likes an honest man. He smiled. It's refreshing, actually. I stared at him, open-mouthed. I don't understand. You're saying you killed... He stood up. Nice meeting you, Amanda. Then he was gone. The next guy sliding into a seat. I'm Frank, and you are... I shot up and whipped around, ran over to the organizer. That guy, Micah, he just told me he killed some woman. I need to know... She raised an eyebrow. What? Oh no. My eyes fell on the seat across the room. The empty seat where Mindy had been sitting. No. I ran out of the bar and onto the sidewalk and into the cold. But the street was covered with people, drunk couples, precocious partygoers. Mindy! I shouted, but no reply. An hour later, I was at the station, reporting it to the police. I tried, I really did. But every woman at the event gave a different description of what Micah looked like. Some said that he was tall, muscular, a black man with a velvety smooth voice. Others described him as a freckled redhead that had an amazing sense of humor. Still, others described him as a bearded lumberjack man. Their descriptions only had one thing in common. He was their type. And the men? They didn't report seeing any Micah at all. Mindy was eventually found. Her body was found in the forest at the edge of town, but not before her blood had been used to paint a crude landscape on the concrete drainage pipe near the lake. I guess Micah, for me, really was an honest man.
I'm a hitman, but I'm not allowed to kill my next target. Michael Zinski wasn't my usual type of client. He wasn't a spurned lover looking for revenge, or a murderer looking to snuff out witnesses to his crime, or a husband hungry for his wife's insurance policy. He was just an ordinary guy looking out for his sister. I wouldn't normally resort to such drastic measures, but Harold has become so awful, treats her like garbage, doesn't give a rat's ass about her or anything, except for that stupid band he sings in with his work buddies. He blew his nose loudly. You understand that, right, Switchblade? I winced. That's just my alias, Michael. You shouldn't, actually call me that in casual conversation. Then what should I call you? I blinked. Clearly, he had never done anything like this before. Do you have the cash? His eyes darted around the diner. Then, from his pocket, he pulled out a wad of $100 bills. You can't just... They'll see it. I hastily threw him one of the napkins. Wrap it up in that, and do it discreetly. He wasn't discreet, but thankfully the diner was nearly empty at this hour. It's twice your usual rate, he whispered, very loudly. I wanted to give you a big tip, so you'll do a good job. A tip? You're not ordering an ice cream cone, Michael. You're ordering a hit. But I took the cash, smiled, and buried it deep in my pocket. And I don't want you to kill him. What? Michael, you know I'm a hitman, right? Yes, but Nancy needs his income. She's been a housewife for the past 20 years. No work experience, no education past high school. There's no way she could support herself on her own. You could support her with the cash you just gave me. He shook his head. I've tried. She won't let me. Cares too much. I sighed. Well, okay. Suppose I did take you up on this job. What do you even want me to do if not kill him? I don't know. Scare him. Threaten him. Just make him stop being so terrible to her. But it's risky business. I mean, he'll know what you look like and... You'll go on Sunday morning. He'll be napping alone in the house. Won't ever see you come in. Michael looked down at the table and then added, it's the only time he's ever alone in the house. The only time he lets her leave. My belligerence evaporated, and I felt a pang of sympathy. It's that bad? He nodded. Okay, I'm in. The house was a tiny little thing, shoved into the gap between a massive brownstone and a dilapidated food mart. It would be a challenge to do it without any witnesses. Good. I like a challenge. I snuck through the backyard, creatively using the various bushes and fencing to hide from the onlookers. I then stepped into the open window, like Michael told me to. The knife was heavy in my hands. I turned left at the kitchen and crept into the living room. In the center stood a microphone, a music stand, and some sheet music, presumably for Harold and his band. Nancy's needlepoint supplies were pushed into the corner, taking up as little space as they possibly could. I walked into the next room, and there in his armchair sat Harold, fast asleep. I retrieved the chloroform from my pocket. With the grace of a dancer, I laid it tightly to his nose, and then I set to work. I visited Nancy myself a few weeks later. I like to do that sometimes. Pose as a friendly neighbor, see how their lives change in the wake of my work. Yes, I know it increases my chances of getting caught, but as I said, I like a challenge. When she flung open the door, her eyes were bright and she wore a smile. "Hi, I'm Smith Baker," I said. "Just moved here, a few houses away from you, buying the food mart." "Oh, how nice. Please come in." She led me into the living room and I smiled. The music stand and other equipment were thrown haphazardly into the corner. Nancy's needlework was sprawled across the sofa, taking up as much space as it possibly could. "Smith, this is my husband Harold." He just stared at me, still, silent, pale. And then he started shaking wildly, clawing at the raw red mark across his throat. "Oh, sorry. I should explain." She sat down with a small smile. "He's not trying to be rude, it's just that, well, he had an accident a few weeks ago, and now he can't speak, I'm afraid." She patted his arm comfortingly as he clung to her. "Or sing, unfortunately." An accident that mysteriously cut his vocal cords and left the rest of him untouched. I could see Harold's hand shaking, his lip trembling. I wonder if he was thinking about the first thing I said to him when the chloroform wore off. "If you don't treat Nancy right, I'll slit your throat again. And next time, you'll lose more than just your voice." I smiled at Harold. "Would you like a cookie?" I asked, holding out the tray. I baked them myself.
I finally got my own AirPods, but I hear something terrifying when I wear them. I first wore the AirPods to the Stop and Shop. It was an incredible, otherworldly experience. I listened to the soothing voice of Neil deGrasse Tyson while picking through the broccoli. I learned about quasars while waiting in line for the deli. But then, things got weird though. When I got to the checkout line, the cashier was one of those annoying ones. The kind that make cute little comments about the items you're buying while you stand there in embarrassment. "Oh, these are good," he said as he slid my pack of lemonade iced tea across the scanner. I turned the volume down on StarTalk. "These are so useful. Own a few of them myself," he said as he scanned the car phone stand. He reached for the truffles, and he looked me straight in the eye and said, "More chocolate for your fat ass, And I stopped dead. "Excuse me?" I asked, slipping out my AirPod. "More chocolate for your art class, huh?" "That's not what you said." "What?" "You said..." And I trailed off, looking at his pimply, juvenile face. He looked so innocent. Never mind. I walked out in a huff. Maybe I did mishear him, I thought as I charged across the parking lot. After all, I was listening to Star Talk at the same time. Maybe the phenomes got all tangled up in each other. Or maybe he was a jerk. I got home in a bad mood, opened the box of truffles and inhaled 3 of them, just to spite him. And then my roommate got home. "Tara, want to join me?" I said, patting the cushion next to me. "Nah," she said, over the low thrum of Kansas coming on through the AirPods. "I gotta take off my shoes and just smell my feet for a while." I stared at her blankly. "When are you going to take your shower?" she asked. "Not sure. Why?" "I'm gonna sneak into your room and stalk your search history, like I do every night." "What?" "I can't believe you just stalk Adam on Face." I ripped out my AirPods. "Bok choy with chicken. Do you want some? I can make extra." I just stared at her. "Are you going through my computer when I'm in the shower?" She paled. Then she ran into the bedroom and slammed the door shut. Did I mishear that too? No, there's no way. I packed a few things and left for my friend's house. And when I got there, she had the TV on.
"The news search is still on for Mackenzie Johnson,"
the newscaster said.
"If you have any information, please call the hotline."
"What's this?" "Some local woman is missing," Amanda said. The film cut to an older man, Mackenzie's husband.
"Please, if you have any information on my wife's whereabouts, go to the police,"
he said, his lip trembling.
"I need her back. Please."
Something stirred inside me. A whim, a realization. I grabbed my bag and reached inside and pulled out my AirPods.
"Please, if you know anything about my..."
His voice changed as soon as I stuck them in.
"Little bitch."
My heart stopped.
It was easy. She's just so weak. So fragile. She's got the rope from the garage and...
I yanked the AirPods out, and his voice returned to a halting sobs.
"Please, if you know anything, call the police."
"Oh, I will." And so I went over and picked up the phone. I work in a doctor's office, but something is wrong with his patient files. This week, I was supposed to digitize all of Dr. Marmon's patient files. I was feeling good about my progress when I saw it. A second filing cabinet hiding behind the shelves that I'd never noticed before. Sighing with fatigue, I yanked open the first drawer. I plucked out a file from the A section and began to read. Aberdeen Carla. All right, Carla. Let's see if you're in the system. I set the file on the desk, sat down at the computer, and typed in her name. But nothing came up. Oh, hell no, I'm not doing all the files in this cabinet. But I sighed, opened a new patient file, and began copying the data. Carla Aberdeen. Date of birth: 4/24/72. 5'9", and 176 pounds. Finally, I got to the doctor's notes. They were written in messy script, as if in a hurry. I put on my glasses and I read, complaints of eczema, itchiness after eating some fruits, lungs may be useful. I stopped and reread that last line. Lungs may be useful. I shrugged, figured it was just some sort of mistake or a reference to something. I typed it in the computer and took the next file from the cabinet. A Mr. David Akowski. But the doctor's notes were even stranger this time. Family history of heart attacks. Large skin surface area. I typed him into the system and stared at the screen. Large skin surface area? What does that even mean? And when I got to the next one, a Ms. Katrina Allenson, I felt the knot in my stomach tighten. History of work stress and anxiety. Recent panic attack. Feet are perfect size. I rolled away from the computer, heart pounding. I picked up the file and studied it. There must be an explanation. But I couldn't think of any. I took a deep breath and then I picked up the phone and dialed the number of Katrina's file. But what will I say? I didn't even know. I just had a terrible, nagging feeling. and wanted to do something about it. But I wasn't in luck. We're sorry. You've reached a number that has been disconnected. What are you doing? I whipped around, and Dr. Marnson was standing in the doorway, his arms crossed over his white coat. I was digitizing the files, like you told me to do. I stuttered, slamming the phone down. Not those files. He violently grabbed the files from the desk, shoved them back into the file cabinet. Then he pulled a small key from his pocket and turned the locks on each drawer. Click, click, click. Finish this up. Okay. And I nodded. And then he was gone. The silence pressed on. The waiting room was empty and still. And I checked the clock. 4:45. No more patients would be coming in. It was only Dr. Marnson and me in the office now. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I shut down the computer, grabbed my coat, and started for the door. As I hurried towards the exit, I saw Dr. Marnin at the end of the hall. He was opening a door. The door he told me went to the supply closet. But beyond him, I could see a set of stairs sneaking down into the darkness. Have you ever looked at the rain recently? It's not water. I first noticed it when I was waiting for the bus. It was raining harder than it had all month and all year. Everyone was crammed in the glass hutch, looking miserable, apparently without umbrellas. I stared at the scene, trying to decide which was worse, getting wet or rubbing butts with strangers. It was an easy decision. I stood in the muddy grass. The rain pattered on my skin, soaking my shirt. Rivulets ran down my forehead, dripping into my eyes, and I reached up to wipe them away. And I froze. The rainwater felt different. It was mildly slippery, like a cross between water and oil. I wet my fingers and rolled them against each other, eyebrows knotted. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but one look at the road told me that it wasn't. Cars were going much slower than usual on the road, maybe 20 miles an hour, and the ones that went faster seemed to careen towards the gutter, as if skidding. I pulled out my phone and began to type, "Rain in Bloomfield." And that's when I heard a scream. I looked up across the sloshing mesh of the street. 2 women were yelling and pointing at a man that had just exited the Starbucks. "You're bleeding! Are you all right?" At first I thought that he was wearing some sort of white shirt with red polka dots. But as the rain began to beat down on him, the shirt grew redder. "Call an ambulance," one of them said. I squinted at the scene, confused. "I'm fine, really. I don't know what's going on," the man said. "Please, don't call anyone." And that's when I figured it out. The rain dots were just raindrops that had fallen. Red lines ran down his face and arms, dripping onto the sidewalk, tinting the puddles pink. "I'm fine, really." 3 days later, I saw his face on the news. John Allard, 45, was arrested for murdering his wife in their home, and on Tuesday night, the trial would be held. "That's the guy," I said, pointing wildly at the TV. The one I told you about, out in the rain." Molly barely looked up. "Oh, that's nice," she said as she rummaged through the kitchen cabinets. Over the next few weeks, more people were caught in the rain, and upon touching a few, the rain ran blood red, staining their clothes just like their hearts. Always within a few days, they turned to some act of violence, whether it be murder, assault, or rape. The town of Bloomfield was in a state of chaos, a state of confusion. No one knew what was going on or what to do about it. Last night we had another storm. Rain pounded across the back door. Lightning flashed across the purple sky. I stood out on the deck, under the awning of the house, just watching. "Molly, come out here. It's beautiful." "The soup's getting cold, Rick," her voice called from the kitchen. Lines of lightning flashed, cracking the webbing across the purple clouds. "Nature's fireworks show," Malo always said. "You love thunderstorms," I called back. The rain picked up tempo, cutting into the awning. "Come out here and see it." She came to the door. "No, come in and eat dinner with me," she said through the screen. "Just a moment. It's sort of romantic. Come on." She sighed. "Okay, fine." Molly stepped cautiously out onto the deck. I threw my arm around her and we stood there for a few moments, watching the lightning flash. But then a gust of wind blew through, sending a spray of raindrops onto my face. "Sorry about that," I said, turning towards her. "Maybe I shouldn't have forced you out here after all." I froze. Beads of blood stuck to her cheek. Molly?" "What?" She turned towards me, and as she did, her arm poked out slightly from the awning. The rain glanced off of it, turning into a deep crimson. I backed away. "Rick, wait," she said, her eyes widening with recognition. With soft smacks, more drops hit her face. They dripped down her cheek in dark lines. I ran into the house. Click. Closed the door and turned the lock. "Rick, please, open the door," she said as her skirt turned red and bloody. I turned away and picked up the phone. The police found a bottle of ethylene glycol in the kitchen cupboard, half of it missing. I like to think that the rain caused her to do it, that all of us are innocent in Bloomfield, and we're being manipulated by some unknown chemical dropping from the skies, choosing people to turn into monsters. But I found the receipt for the poison. It was dated back 6 months ago. It continues to rain here in Bloomfield. Every day I see the gray storm clouds overhead. My stomach ties up in knots, wondering what evil will be revealed. But they've gotten smarter. When I drive down Main Street in the rain, only a few stragglers remain. The rest stay inside. And the ones that do walk out, well, they're smart enough to use their umbrellas.
I think I'm trapped in a Hallmark movie. I first noticed it in the kitchen. My sister was putting the final touches on a batch of Christmas cookies. Turning to get more icing, she bumped the plate with her hip, and it flew into the ground. "Oh gosh darn it." What? "Gosh darn it?" I chuckled. "Who are you and what have you done with my sister?" Brittany stared at me blankly. Look, I know my sister. She swears like a 50-year-old sailor, drunk on cheap beer. Ruining an hour of cookie making should have at least elicited a frag. But it didn't. "Ah, I see. This is an act for Jonathan." I winked at her. "Don't worry, I won't tell." "What are you talking about?" she asked. I bent down picking up a shattered piece of cookie. You know, your constant swearing. Your secret's safe with me. I reached for another piece of cookie, picked it up and threw it towards the garbage. Instead of falling in, it ricocheted off the edge. Ah, frick. I froze. At that exact moment I said frick, a car horn had blared outside, drowning it out completely. I frowned. Frick. Another car horn. Frick, frick, frickety frick. A strangely loud flock of geese cawed outside the window. What the is going on here? I stared at Brittany, eyes wide. She ignored my question. We have to bake more cookies, she continued, as if I hadn't said anything. If the Christmas celebration tonight doesn't impress Christopher, He's going to shut down the community center forever. The community center? When have you given a about the community center? Since I started Woofies. What? You know, my business, baking dog Christmas cookies. I frowned. These cookies are for dogs? She nodded. Okay, look, what has gotten into you? I stood up, brushing the crumbs off my hands. You don't even like dogs. You say they make too much noise and poop everywhere. You don't even like animals, period. Or kids. That reminds me, Christopher's nephew is going to be at the celebration. He's an orphan and he loves dogs too. I think I'm going to surprise him with a puppy from the shelter. I stared at her. What? It's going to be so awesome. Don't you love Christmas? I threw up my hands. You're acting really weird right now. I'm going to, go rest for a while, okay? She nodded, eyes wide and perky smile on her face. That's when I noticed something else. She wasn't wearing her usual outfit of a black tank top and skin-tight jeans. Instead, she was wearing a bright red sweater and a neat skirt. Her hair, which was usually tied up in a messy bun, fell in a perfect, loose waves around her face. You're dressed weird, I muttered. She just smiled back at me. I trudged out of the kitchen through the family room. I was about to climb the stairs when I stopped. Something's different. Well, for one, our mom's house was clean, which was super weird, because she's a borderline hoarder who keeps everything from 20-year-old Christmas cards to free pens. The clutter was gone. A fire was going in the fireplace, and a fluffy red throw sat across the sofa. Weird. But there was something else. My gaze caught on the mantel above the fireplace. Even from a distance, I could tell the photos were different. I'd seen the photos there a million times. The dorky photo of me in braces, I hated. The photo of us four and our cat. They were burned into my brain. Not one of the familiar photos remained. I stepped closer, studying the photos. A girl with braces playing outside. A mother and father sitting on a sofa, 2 toddlers between them. 2 girls holding hands while sitting on a swing. My heart dropped. Every muscle in my body paralyzed. They weren't us. They looked like stock photos of a family that roughly, very roughly, resembled ours. I ran up the stairs, my head spinning, my throat dry. What's going on here? Nothing made sense. Not the way Brittany was acting, not the way she was dressed. Not my mom's house, not her photos. It all clashed in my brain. So wrong. I collapsed into bed. The bed of my childhood room, the only thing that felt familiar in this house. My stuff had been boxed up long ago, but the walls were still the shade of lavender I picked out in middle school. The bedspread was still a deep purple. The mattress was still as soft as a feather. I lay in silence. Funny how now there were no random car horns or flock of Canadian geese. I was almost drifting off to sleep when I heard it. Footsteps in the hallway. Brittany? I called. But they sounded louder, heavier, like a man's footsteps. I shot up in bed, my heart pounding. Our father passed away several years ago. Christmas dinner wasn't for a few more days. Too early for our uncles to be here. I backed away, heart drumming in my chest. Hello? I called out. The footsteps paused. Who's there? I shouted. The footsteps resumed, closer, now so close that they were right outside my door. Brittany! I shouted, hoping she could hear me. Brittany, there's someone... The door opened. My voice died in my throat. A man stood there, a naked man, with only a small towel wrapped around his waist. He stared at me with dark, hungry eyes. Then he smiled. Hey, honey, are you okay? I screamed. Honey, what's wrong? The man was rushing towards me. I ducked underneath his outstretched arms and ran to the door. Down the stairs out the front door, I heard Brittany shouting behind me, but I didn't listen. I kept running and running. In a few blocks, I reached the town, but it wasn't our town. It was a cutesy little town that time forgot, with little shops lining the sidewalks and tinsel strung up between the street lamps. Gone were the liquor stores, rowdy teenagers, and the endless supply of litter. And yes, there was even a community center. But not our community center of stained concrete and smashed beer bottles in the parking lot. No. It was now a darling brick building, a Christmas candle burning in each window. No, this can't be. What the frick is happening? I hurried forward. As I walked, snowflakes began to fall from the gray sky. A few landed on my bare arms. They didn't melt. "Hey!" I called out to the nearest person. A woman waiting to cross the street, with perfect wavy hair and a bright red peacoat. "Hey, can you help me?" She turned towards me, a smile plastered on her face. "Of course, what do you need?" "I don't think I belong here. This isn't my town, I faltered. Her grin had faded. She now stared at me, face set in stone, eyes burning with hatred. Then she took a step towards me. I ran. And that brings us here. I've been hiding out behind a perfectly decorated Christmas tree in someone's yard. Don't worry, the house isn't actually occupied. Despite all the cute lights and candy canes, I looked in the windows. The house is completely empty on the inside, so I'm safe, for now. But I don't think I'll be here long. There's a ring on my left ring finger, probably belonging to the man back at my parents' house. I'll probably call the police around here and tell them that I'm missing, that I seem mentally unstable, that I should be apprehended immediately. At least the internet seems to work, but calling Brittany's number and my mom's has only resulted in static. All I can do now is ask for your help. If you turn on your TV and see a Christmas movie featuring a short girl with a mole on her right cheek and an AC/DC t-shirt, that's me. Help me, please. Help me leave this place before it's too late.
Do not read a book called Goodnight Precious to your children. My son is 2 years old and does not sleep. So when I saw an ad online for Goodnight Precious, the only book guaranteed to put your child to sleep, I clicked. Now I was skeptical, but there was a video demonstration on the website. I'm going to show you how this works right now. I've got a child ready for bed, the goated man mentioned to a 3 to 4 year old boy lying in bed wide awake. I'm going to read the book to him and watch what happens. The video cut to him in the book. The sun is set and you slumber. Good night, precious little wonder. As soon as he closed the book, the boy's eyes fixed straight ahead, blank and motionless. Then they fluttered shut. No wake up is in the middle of the night either. Once he falls asleep from this book, he stays asleep, the man said over the boy's light snores. I was sold. I clicked the order link and in 3 days, I had the book in my hands. It was a lot thinner than I expected, only a few cardboard pages. The cover was a drawing of a boy sleeping in bed, as an old woman, maybe his grandma, watched them from a rocking chair in the corner. I read it to Jackson that night. It's time to go to sleep, little dear. When you wake up, I'll still be here, I read softly. The illustration showed an old woman tucking a child into bed. She wasn't smiling. I glanced at Jackson, still wriggling and wide awake, but he seemed to be enjoying it, at least. Night has fallen, stars are out. Go to sleep now, don't you pout. This image showed the same woman, sitting in a rocking chair next to her sleeping child. You'll sleep through the sadness, sleep through the pain, and when it's done, we'll do it again. That rhyme's a real stretch. I glanced at the image. The woman was getting out of her seat, walking towards her son's bed. Go to sleep now, little one. Be patient now. We're almost done. In the drawing, the woman looked down at her sleeping child from the bedside. She was holding a pillow. I turned the page to the last one, and my heart stopped. The old woman was pressing the pillow against the child's face, smiling with one of those cartoonish grins that you often see in kids' books. I read in a soft, cautious voice. "The sun is set, and you slumber. Good night, precious. Little wonder." I closed the book and looked over at Jackson. He was fast asleep. It really works. I moved him to his bed and enjoyed some well-earned alone time. Who cares if the book is a little weird? It works. And an hour later, I was asleep. I woke up at 8. Jackson didn't wake me up at all. A welcome change from his usual. I looked over at his still, slumbering body and smiled. But by 11, he still hadn't woken up. He never sleeps this late. Maybe he's sick. I turned on some light music and talked to him. I patted his back, but no response. "Jackson?" I said as I picked him up and put him on my lap. His head just slumped against my chest. "Jackson, are you okay?" Nothing. Just his soft, deep breaths against mine. Jackson, wake up!" Nothing. I yelled in his ear. I bounced him up and down. I brought him out into the sun, and nothing woke him up. Now it's almost 3 o'clock, and he's been asleep for 19 hours. I'm about to load him into the car seat and drive him to the doctor. I think I did something terribly wrong with him.